So which one is your favorite? Oh, you can't ask me to choose. They're my children. You mean they're like your children, right? No, I have no further questions. Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, one of the most important parts of a Monster Hunter game is the weapons, and one of everyone's favorite parts of these is how they look, their aesthetics, their designs, and especially in a game like Monster Hunter Wilds with artian weapons all over the place being the optimal damage options and proper endgame, it can be easy to forget just how many absolutely amazing weapon designs there are in this game. So today I'm going to take a bit to talk about my top 10 favorite weapon designs in Monster Hunter Wilds with a couple of constraints. I won't be including anything from previous Monster Hunter games as I want to stick to fresh new designs, and I'm going to limit myself to both trying to not have too many entries made of the same monster's materials and no more than one entry per weapon type either. So we have a bit more variety than just ending with like 10 Hirabami weapons or something like that, of course, and blocking off old weapons because otherwise Kongolala dual blades and Yonkoku light bowgun would be immediate winners, and that's not fair to the new designs. As well, a quick honorable mention to the artian weapons because there are a number of them that do actually look good. I'm just sort of sick of looking at them right now because the majority of players are using them for very good reason.
And if you somehow have disappointed Arkveld by not already having wilds,
disappointed!
Well, you can remedy that thanks to MSI, who is kindly sponsoring this video. They are currently letting you pick up one of their crisp, responsive, and honestly, I've tested a lot of them myself, really solid gaming QD OLED monitors, and if you do, you get wilds and an extra 25 quid to spend on Steam to boot, which is really, really nice. And even if you want to go a little bit further, you can still get wilds for free when you grab one of the 4K options. It's very simple. You select your eligible model from this lovely lineup, and then you simply follow this process, revolving around simply reviewing the monitor. You can find all of this and details on the link down below, but if you happen to be in a situation where you've been thinking about upgrading, well, this is the way to do it because you get some goodies alongside. Even if you already have wilds, the extra 25 quid to spend on Steam is a really nice touch. And as there's only 82, at least at the time of me saying this, left, it's probably less now. If you are thinking about it, I would think quickly. So with that said then, on with the show.
All that said, let's begin in 10th place with Blanganga Dual Blades. These sai-shaped weapons are absolutely gorgeous. They rated a lot of Blanganga weapons in general for Wilds with their designs, and these dual blades are phenomenal looking. They are a little bit thick, a little bit meaty, but that is good for a monster hunting weapon as far as I'm concerned. It makes it able to do more damage to larger creatures. The color scheme with the blade almost looking like it's made of ivory, the gold trim and plating, the gemstones on it too, and the big fancy pommels on the end as well. Maybe it's the fact that Raphael was always my favorite Ninja Turtle, but Sai in general I really love the shape of as a weapon design, and implementing them as dual blades with this aesthetic style is just lovely. Yes, this is a design from a returning monster, but the weapon design itself is absolutely new, and it's definitely an upgrade over the old ones as well. Next up in 9th place, our second and last Blanganga weapon, Blanganga Insect Glaive. This thing is incredible. I know it's not a traditional insect glaive shape or style, hell, it's not even a glaive technically, it's basically a quarterstaff, and more specifically it is quite clearly a reference to the Monkey King's staff in particular, matching the aesthetic of the male Blanganga armor as well as a result. That said, I love the idea of a quarterstaff insect glaive as a whole, but I also like blunt weapons in general, but especially with some of the new moves like Rising Spiral Slash and Descending Slash, it actually feels really in character with the Monkey King as a character, and conceptually with a quarterstaff it feels like a perfect pairing as a result of that. The bulbous endings on the weapon look like lovely smacking bits as a blunt weapon aficionado myself, and again, like the dual blades, it's more subtle golden trim, the little gemstones, the bits of purpley ornate fabric, and the fact that there is actually Blanganga fur on the weapon. It's just done very tastefully. It's very ornate, but compared to most Monster Hunter weapons, it's also sleek and classy. It's just got that perfect blend of unique shape and good color work as well. Excuse me. Oh, sorry. And compared to the Blenganga insect glaive that was made for Monster Hunter Generations, the one that used to exist, it is a massive improvement. Moving on up to the 8th spot, then we have the Hirabami Lance. And generally when I rank my weapons by design, I tend towards ones that are a bit unusual in their shape compared to anything else that the weapon has, something a bit unlike the generic members of their type, or just really special quality in the design itself. This one is a good mix of both of these, in my opinion, and makes good use of the actual monster materials too, which I definitely enjoy. You've got the tail claw of the Hirabami as the actual pointy end of the lance, giving you some really gnarly damage potential if we assume that it is properly sharp, which the monster definitely implies it is. Then the whole rest of the way down is basically just a banner made of skin that flows in the wind and has just ridiculous physics on it. The coloring is gorgeous, and if you actually watch the weapon, you'll see the pattern sort of shifts very slightly as the banner itself is carried by the wind and the physics and all that. The shield is of course lovely too. The actual metal parts on both halves of the weapon have some really nice ornate accented bits on them as well. Next up in 7th place we have the Shewu Greatsword, and this thing is absolutely gorgeous. Generally my tastes lean more towards silly or strange rather than just pure coolness, but I cannot deny that this thing is just beautiful. Shining segmented golden blade like the monster himself, hardening mucus around the outside, the seam line of little teeth through the middle, making it feel almost like the greatsword itself has an insatiable mouth of its own that needs infinite feeding. It almost feels like a weapon straight out of Soul Eater, like I could totally see this just turning into an actual person when the hunt is over. That said, it's the little details that really make me like this one. The wrappings on the crossguard are just the right shape to evoke the feeling of a turban, like the shape of the head of the monster itself, but then the ornate designs the whole way down the hilt of the sword too, the various gemstones, the wrapping golden tentacle of hand protection that is just also having a golden chain wrapped around it connected to the bottom too. It's just so lovingly designed. You can feel the hours that someone put in making sure this weapon looked as good as it does, and as far as I'm concerned, it was worth the effort. It is a beautiful weapon. Moving on to 6th then, another Shewu weapon, this one being the hunting horn. It's essentially a representation of the monster's head, complete with the bits of hair like tentacles coming out of the upper section. On the front side, you've got these beautifully inner divots representing the inside of the monster's mouth, all spiky and terrifying, but it also sort of looks like noise-reducing foam, which is very specifically fitting for a hunting horn, and even outside of that, it gives the sound more places to bounce off of from just having the hole on the inside, sort of like a guitar. It's a weirdly coherent musical instrument design for having so many monstery bits on it, and such insane-looking aesthetics as well. I love the way that it looks so much the whole way through, a perfect mix of silly and cool while being a great homage to the monster itself, and some musical instruments. Not to mention that as a hunting horn, this does of course have a unique sound to the song that it plays, and I do count that when ranking weapon designs because it is a part of the design, and very unlike other hunting horns, I believe the instrument this is based off of is the pipa. I could be wrong. It's definitely in that family of traditional stringed instruments, and I adore the sound that it makes when playing it too. And as if that wasn't enough, well unsheathed, the whole dome of the weapon just sort of pulsates and like gets bigger and smaller every couple of seconds. I don't know why, but you know, I guess why not? In 5th place today, we've got the Arkveld hammer, and this one feels extremely self-explanatory when you look at it. Again, normally I don't just go in for straight up cool designs, I'm not too big on just pure cool factor, but this is essentially an oversized Mjolnir with dragon scaling motifs on the actual head of the hammer itself, and because this is an Arkveld weapon, it also pulses with energy stolen from other monsters, and it has a bunch of chains wrapped around it as well to represent the monster too. If you look up and down the more metallic parts of the weapon as well, it has some Celtic knotting on it, which, while the common term used is essentially the same to Norse knotting designs, which then of course roots this weapon even more in the Viking aesthetic it's already aiming for. It even has a cool extra lore blurb on the weapon itself, saying that it was designed for and wielded by a knight who could lift it in a single hand. And while this is likely just flavor text, it probably doesn't mean anything like lore-wise, it also, I think, clearly serves to further cement the idea that this is just Monster Hunter Mjolnir, and how can you not love that as a concept? Moving on to 4th place, our second Hirabami weapon today, Hirabami Switch Axe. I could have put multiple switch axes on this list if I hadn't held myself back to one entry per weapon type. They have been really on their game with making cool morphing weapon designs in Wilds, and this is my favorite one personally. In axe mode, it uses the tail blades of the Hirabami as the main damaging implement, which I do love, but then the ornate shaping of it in general is really just pleasing to the eye. The use of the banner-like skin to essentially tie off the weapon and keep it together and lock it into the different forms is a really cool use of the skin of the monster. Then you get to the sword mode as well, and depending on your knowledge of bladed weapons, this is either obvious to you or it's going to blow your mind a little bit, but this is a Chinese hook sword, and the weapon is also a Chinese hook sword. Look how goddamn similar the profile of the weapon is to this blade. Isn't that awesome? I mean, on its own, this switch axe is clearly just a really cool, gnarly weapon design using different parts of a monster to achieve a very unique and special look. Beautiful bladed bits, great ornate designs, again, excellent use of monster parts while putting the weapon together. But the part that gets me most is just how beautifully, yet sort of subtly, this perfectly matches a real-life sword design. While not just being like a typical classic big sword, it is a very specific sword design. This was something very purposefully and lovingly created, something that had a lot of thought put into it, and I appreciate the hell out of it. Next up, podium placements. Now, my third favorite weapon design in Wilds is the Rompopolo Longsword, and I want to start just with the sheath weapon here. This thing has like a sewn together patchwork kind of feel, which obviously is meant to represent that it's Rompopolo skin attached by gemma together while making the weapon and stuff, but it also gives it a very sort of like mad, evil scientist doctor vibe right out of the gate, and this part is about to be fun for anyone who hasn't seen the weapon unsheathed before, but here it is. It's essentially a gigantic hacksaw with a goopy, poisonous sheen on the blade itself, which is clearly also made with monster materials. The entire back section of the blade is like twisted up Rompopolo skin with a slight little inflated bit in the middle for some reason, a nice little ornate metal bits around the weapon too, but no lie, this one is almost entirely a shape and essentially feel thing. The type of choice that they've made here. It is such a unique weapon in the series. I love that it is a longsword, that's a great fit for it. I love its sheath, and the fact that it interacts with the special sheath mechanic because it's a longsword is great too. And I love the way that it fits Rompopolo as a monster, and especially how well it fits the rest of the equipment's aesthetic too for the monster. More so than any of his other weapons, as far as I'm concerned personally. And it would be a perfect weapon for like a mad scientist who just also happens to be a monster hunter. Second place, Shewu Bow. It's the only monster here with 3 entries on this list, and honestly, it was tempting to include even more, but I stopped myself because this easily could have been like 7 or more of the Shewu entries alone, or even just my 10 favorite Shewu weapons. This, however, is my absolute favorite one of these for so many reasons. From the front, it's just a tentacle bow, sure, fantastic for a cephalopod, right though? Like, that's an awesome concept. Well, there's also sharp, hardened golden points at the top and bottom to represent his tentacle weapons themselves, and aside from just being a beautiful ornate pattern on the tentacles, there are of course 6 of them total, making up the bow, and in a way that almost makes functional sense for a bow. Usually splitting a bow into multiple pieces on either end is a really bad idea, as bows work entirely around tension, and when you do that, you end up with less tension. Splitting up that tension is a big mistake for a functional weapon, but the fact that the tentacles loop back and group back together into one solid structure at either end makes it at least slightly more believable, even if it is definitely a little bit fancy. There's little floaty black stuff coming off at the top, which I think is supposed to represent the hair-like tentacles on the monster too, but it's the inner side of this bow that gets me the most, the part that you'll often be looking at the most while playing, because this is perfectly representative of the underside of the tentacles of the monster, the glowing blue inside bits lined with these little ornamental teeth. It just feels like you're using a tiny Shewu itself as a bow. Then of course there is the quiver, as this is a bow, so it has a quiver as well, which is just a beautifully ornate mix of gold and the skin-like texture as well, some nice gemstone-y bits, the nice soft looking blue patch on the inside as well, and the arrows themselves look like they are wrapped in bits of Shewu and have a little golden tip on them as well. It's just a really solid design for a weapon all around. I absolutely adore this one. Then up in first place, my absolute favorite new weapon design is the Jin Dahaad sword and shield. Look at its sheath. It's just like a cool mace and shield with some really pointy bits. It's nice to have a mace, sword, and shield. Those do happen sometimes, but this is a particularly good looking one. Some good representations of Jin Dahaad's little metal-like heatsink bits. I love the coloring on them as well. It's very fun. And then you unsheath it, and it's not just a mace, it's a flail that extends out of the mace with like a launching, detaching chain section. A mace that turns into a flail on command. I love this so much. Flails are my favorite real-world weapon. I just find these spinning motions very satisfying and love the idea of momentum buildup being used to do damage. And yes, I know real-life flails were generally not a great choice to use, and were also responsible for a lot of self-hitting, but aesthetically, flails are my favorite kind of weapon, and having a sword and shield that is a flail in Monster Hunter is awesome, but having one that turns into a flail, not even just is one permanently, is even cooler. And of course, the general design even past that is absolutely on point. Again, beautiful use of Jin Dahaad's design to fuel a very gnarly and damaging looking weapon. But the big part for me is just the fact that this is a flail, because it's just such a wild weapon choice to use for a sword and shield, and it really opens up even more possibilities for funky weapon types in the future. Not to mention that in certain areas, because of the physics engine of the game, the flail refuses to clip through the floor. So if you stand still when the ground is slightly uneven with your character, it will just start to like slowly bounce the end off of the ground repeatedly, and essentially the end of the flail, the head of the flail, will start dancing for you as long as you stand still, because the weapon is so long because of the chain that it collides with the floor, but it refuses to clip through, and because the weapon isn't like directly attached to the actual shaft of it, it just sort of bounces around at the end of the chain. And it's just a really silly part of the weapon that makes me love it even more. That just about does it for today then, everyone. The list of my own top 10 favorite weapon designs in Monster Hunter Wilds, the ones that really speak to me personally, and of course being limited to the ones that are new in this game, not returning ones from old games. These won't necessarily line up with your own favorites, but hopefully I've at least presented the case for each choice in a reasonable enough way, because I really want others to be able to appreciate these just as much as I do. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and let me know your own favorite weapon designs in the comments down below. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.